This is the story of how silence became my best answer, how consistency became my greatest revenge, and how stoic discipline changed not only my life, but the lives of everyone around me. Before we begin, if you believe that actions speak louder than words, leave a like now. And if you want to learn how a single devastating comment can spark a massive transformation, stay until the end. Because what you're about to hear will challenge everything you think about resilience. My name is Klaus Hoffmann, and for 3 years I was considered ballast at Fischer Industries, one of Germany's largest automobile manufacturers based just outside Stuttgart. That's not how I started out. There was a time when I was ambitious, dedicated, and full of dreams. Fresh off my mechanical engineering degree from the Technical University of Munich, I came to Fischer Industries believing I would change the world, that my ideas would revolutionize the German automotive industry. But life has a cruel way of destroying dreamers. In the first 6 months, I presented 17 innovation projects. 17, each carefully planned, costed, and based on thorough research. Do you know how many were even considered? No. My direct supervisor, Mr. Dietrich Weber, a 58-year-old man with 3 decades of service, had a simple philosophy. If it's worked for the past 30 years, it doesn't need to be changed. Every project I took on was met with the same condescending look and the same withering remark. You're too young to understand how things really work here, Hoffman. So I tried to adapt. I stopped contributing ideas. I just started doing what I was told. But something inside me had shattered. The flame, the passion that had driven me to engineering, slowly began to die out. I arrived at 8:30, sometimes at 9. I only did the bare minimum. Lunches stretched over an hour and a half. I left promptly at 5. On weekends, I forgot about Monday and drowned my frustration in beer in Stuttgart's beer gardens. My friend Anna tried to warn me. "Klaus, you're just a shadow of yourself," she said on a cold November night. "Look at yourself. When was the last time you woke up excited to go to work? When was the last time you talked about your dreams?" I had no answer. I just shrugged and opened another bottle. 3 weeks later, Anna left me. There was no argument, no scandal. She simply said, "I can't watch you give up on yourself, Klaus." I fell in love with a dreamer, not a ghost. That was my first major loss, but it wouldn't be my last. At work, my reputation was in free fall. I became invisible, and when you're invisible in a German company where precision and punctuality are religiously important, you become a problem. And then that day came, the Wednesday that would change everything. It was a perfectly normal March morning. I arrived at 9:15 a.m. with a cup of cold coffee from the bakery, my hair disheveled, my eyes puffy from another sleepless night. The monthly department meeting was starting, and I dragged myself into the conference room. Mr. Weber was standing there checking the productivity figures. When I entered, he stopped. All eyes turned to me. 23 pairs of German eyes, punctual and disciplined, assessed me. "I'm glad Mr. Hoffman joined us," Weber said sarcastically. "I hope we didn't disturb anything important." Muffled laughter echoed through the room. I mumbled an apology and sat down. But Weber wasn't finished yet. "Since you're here, Hoffman, perhaps you could explain to us why your productivity report from last quarter shows that you are the least productive engineer not only in this department, but in the entire automotive division." The silence was deafening. I'll be completely frank with you, in front of everyone, because maybe peer pressure can do what my patience couldn't. Weber stepped closer, placed both hands on the table, and leaned toward me. "You're lazy, Hoffman. Just lazy. You're wasting your potential. You're wasting the company's time, and you're wasting the oxygen in this room." Every word was a blade. I have engineers here who come in at 7 in the morning, who stay later if necessary, who treat this company like it's their own. And then I have you, who acts like you're doing the world a favor by just showing up. He returned to the front of the room. "You have 3 months, Hoffman. 3 months to prove to me that it wasn't a mistake not to fire you yet. 3 months to show that there's more to you than laziness and mediocrity. Otherwise, we'll be having a completely different conversation in June." The meeting continued, but I couldn't hear anything. My heart was pounding so hard I thought everyone could hear it. My hands were shaking. My face burned with humiliation. When the meeting ended, I left the room like the walking dead. I went straight to the bathroom, locked myself in a stall, and cried for the first time in years. I cried with anger, shame, and frustration. But in those tears, something happened. Something changed. Because as I sat there in the cold restroom of a German company and looked at my shaking hands, a question flashed through my mind. Is he right? Was that the truth? Had I really become lazy? Or had I simply given up because the path was too difficult? And then I remembered something my grandfather, a World War II survivor who rebuilt his life from the rubble, always said, "Klaus, the world doesn't care about your excuses. The world only sees what you do. If you want respect, don't ask for it. Earn it, quietly, with discipline, until your actions are so loud that no one can ignore them." That night, as I sat in my one-room apartment in Stuttgart, surrounded by empty bottles and abandoned dreams, I made a decision. It wouldn't be an emotional decision. It wouldn't be an empty promise I made in the heat of humiliation. It would be something different, something I'd never experienced before. It would be a stoic decision. I had read Marcus Aurelius in college, more out of duty than interest, but that night I was rummaging through my bookshelves and found Meditations. I opened a random page and read, "You have power over your mind, not over external events. Realize this, and you'll find strength." I read it again and again. So I grabbed a notebook and started writing. No grand plan, no impossible promises, just simple principles. First, I can't control what Mr. Weber thinks of me, but I can control my actions. Second, I can't change the past, but I can decide who I will be tomorrow. 3, words are cheap. Results are expensive. I'll stop explaining myself and start proving it. 4, discipline isn't a motivational boost. It's quiet consistency, day after day, even when no one's watching. 5th, my goal is not revenge. It's transformation. The best response to humiliation is to evolve to the point where comparisons become impossible. I glanced at the clock. It was 11 p.m. Normally, I would stay up until 1 o'clock or 2 a.m., scrolling through meaningless feeds and procrastinating the inevitable. Not today. I set my alarm for 4:30 a.m. I closed my notebook. I went to bed. And for the first time in years, I slept with a purpose. When the alarm went off at 4:30 the next morning, my body screamed in protest. Every cell in my body wanted me to hit the snooze button and crawl back under the warm covers. But I got up, not because I was motivated, not because I wanted to, but because I had decided to. And stoic decisions don't depend on feelings. I took a cold shower. I made myself a strong coffee. I sat down at the kitchen table with my laptop and started going through all the projects I neglected over the past few weeks. By 6 o'clock in the morning, I had already done more work than I normally do in a whole day. I left the house at 6:30 a.m. It was still dark. The streets of Stuttgart were empty, quiet, and shrouded in morning mist typical of a German spring. I arrived at Fisher Industries at 7 a.m. The parking lot was almost empty. Only 3 cars. One of them, I knew, belonged to the head of security. The other 2 belonged to senior engineers, the same ones Weber had praised at the meeting. I entered the building. I greeted the security guard, who looked at me in surprise. "Hoffman, it's 7 in the morning. Is everything okay?" I smiled. "I'm fine, Gunther. Another day." I went to my department. The lights were still off. I just turned on the light at my desk. I sat down. I opened my computer, and I started working. I didn't work out of anger. I didn't work to prove something. I worked because I intended to. At 8 o'clock, the department filled up. Colleagues arrived and were surprised to see me already there. Some made comments. Others just stared at me in confusion. At 8:30, Mr. Weber arrived. He walked past my desk, stopped, looked at me, then at the clock on the wall, and then back at me. He said nothing. He just kept walking, but I saw something in his eyes. Surprise, perhaps suspicion. I didn't care. I kept working. True discipline isn't found on the first day. Anyone can have a good day. True discipline is found on the second day, when the novelty is worn off. On the third day, when your body is still adjusting. In the first week, when your friends start asking you questions. In the first month, when no one else is paying attention. On the second day, I woke up at 4:30 and arrived at 7:15. On the third day, I woke up at 4:30 and arrived at 7:10. On the fourth day, my body was crying out for rest. I hadn't slept well and was dreaming about the meeting and Weber's words. But at 4:30, I woke up. I arrived at 7:15. Already in the first week, some colleagues began making comments. "Hoffman has turned a new leaf," said one. "He must be desperate," mocked another. "He'll last a week." I didn't answer. I just smiled and continued working. In my second week, my supervisor noticed not only my presence but also my work. I delivered a report that normally took me 3 days to complete in 1 day. I solved a technical problem that had been on hold for weeks in one morning. On Friday of this week, Weber called me into his office. "Hoffman," he said, without looking up from his papers, "I noticed you arrived early." "Yes, sir. Is there a particular reason?" I could have said many things. I could have explained my transformation, my decision, my Stoic principles. But I remember the third principle. Words are cheap. "I'm just doing my job, sir." Finally, he looked at me. He studied my face, searching for something. Sarcasm? Challenge? He found nothing but calm. "Keep it up," he said, turning back to his papers. It was the first time in 3 years that he gave me anything close to a compliment. On the third day of the third week, something unexpected happened. I was so engrossed in my work that I didn't even notice the hours. When I looked at the clock, it was 7 p.m. The office was almost empty, and there, 3 stops away, was Mr. Weber. He also worked late. Our eyes met for a moment. He nodded. I nodded back. In that quiet moment, something changed. I don't know if it was respect, recognition, or simply the mutual recognition of 2 men doing what needed to be done. But something has definitely changed. A month passed, then 2. I didn't count the days. I didn't cross any days off the calendar. I simply lived according to my principles. 4:30 a.m. every day, no exceptions. 7:10 in the office before sunrise. The transformation wasn't just external. The real change took place within me. I'd forgotten what it was like to be proud of my work. What it was like to fall asleep tired, not out of frustration, but because I've accomplished something. What it was like to look in the mirror and recognize the person in it. My health improved. I started running in the mornings before work. I gave up alcohol, not out of heroic willpower, but because it simply no longer made sense in the life I was building for myself. My apartment, once the chaos of a depressed man, was organized. Minimalistically, every object had its place, just as every hour of my day had its purpose. I started reading again, not escapist fiction, but philosophy, biographies of great engineers, and technical books that kept me sharp. And the strangest thing, I was happy, truly happy, not the superficial happiness of Fridays and weekends, but something deeper, a contentment that came from knowing I was living in accordance with my values. Marcus Aurelius was right. The happiness of your life depends on the quality of your thoughts. At work, my reputation began to change. Subtly at first, then more noticeably. A colleague approached me with a complex technical problem. Then another. Soon I was being consulted regularly, something I hadn't experienced in years. My productivity reports, once a disgrace, were now among the best in the department. But I didn't celebrate publicly. I didn't post anything about it. I didn't brag about it. I just kept going day after day, consistently and quietly, because I had learned something profound. True discipline needs no audience. At the beginning of the third month, Fisher Industries announced a special project. The Wolfsburg headquarters was developing a new suspension system for electric vehicles and needed an engineer from Stuttgart to lead the testing. It was the kind of project every engineer dreams of. Visibility, responsibility, a stepping stone to higher positions. Mr. Weber called a special meeting to announce his selection. I hadn't expected to be selected, not after 3 years of being a burden. But I didn't care. I was on my way, quietly building my excellence, oblivious to external opportunities. This project, Weber began, requires not only technical skill, but also discipline, reliability, the ability to deliver consistent performance, even under pressure and without constant supervision. He paused and looked around the room. After careful consideration, taking into account not only his technical competence, but also the character he has demonstrated over the past few months, I have decided that Engineer Hoffman will lead this project. There was absolute silence in the room. All eyes were on me. Some were surprised, others with something like respect. But the eyes that mattered most were Weber's. And in them, I saw something I had never seen before, admiration. After the meeting, he took me aside. "Hoffman," he said, closing the door to his office, "I'll be honest with you. When I humiliated you in that meeting 3 months ago, I didn't expect you to last even a week. I thought you'd quit or I'd have to fire you." He paused. "But you surprised me. And more than that, you taught me something. In 30 years in the business world, I've met many talented young people, some with brilliant ideas, others with impressive credentials. But talent without discipline is like a high-performance car without a steering wheel. It goes fast but gets nowhere." He sat down. "You've not only become disciplined, Hoffman, you've become consistent. And consistency, calm and relentless, is more valuable than explosive talent, because I can count on consistency. I can build on consistency." For the first time, Weber extended his hand. "Thank you for proving me wrong about you." I squeezed his hand, and in that moment, I realized I felt neither triumph nor revenge. I felt only gratitude. Gratitude for the humiliation that forced me to wake up. Gratitude for the pain that drove me to transformation. Gratitude for the discovery that inside the broken man, there was still a warrior waiting to be awakened. The project was challenging. 3 months of intensive testing, detailed reports, and coordination with teams from multiple cities. There were times when I worked 12 or 14 hours a day, but I never interrupted my morning routine. 4:30 every day. Because discipline under favorable conditions isn't discipline at all, but merely convenience. There was a certain moment that would define everything. It was Thursday, 2 a.m. I'd been in the test lab for 18 hours. A critical problem had arisen with the chassis data. If it wasn't resolved by morning, the entire project would be delayed for weeks. My team had gone home exhausted. Only I was left. At 4 in the morning, I found the problem. A tiny error in the calibration algorithms. I fixed it, reran all the tests, and documented everything. At 6 in the morning, with burning eyes and a body crying out for rest, I had 2 options: go home and sleep, or go to the office as usual. I remember Marcus Aurelius. If you don't want to get up at dawn, think, I get up to do a man's work. I went home. I showered. I changed my clothes. I was in my office at 7:15, as usual, not out of stubbornness, not out of pride, but because I had become someone who kept my commitments to myself, regardless of the circumstances. Mr. Weber arrived at 8 o'clock. He saw me working there. He looked at me for a long time and then checked his emails. There was my report, which he had sent at 5:56 a.m., in which he described the solution and the fix in detail. He came to my station. "Hoffman, have you been here all night?" "Until I find the solution, yes, sir." "And now you're back here?" "I have work to do, sir." He shook his head, somewhere between disbelief and admiration. "Go home, Hoffman. Sleep. That's an order. With all due respect, sir, I'd rather finish what I started today. I can go home early, but I'd like to at least complete the most important revisions." Weber looked at me for a long moment. "You've changed, Hoffman. Completely. It's not just about getting up early or working hard. You've changed as a person. There's something different in your eyes." He was right, because true transformation is never just about habits. It's about identity. I was no longer the man who got up late and only did the bare minimum. I had become a different person. Someone whose word was sacred in itself. Someone who understood that discipline is not punishment, but freedom. The freedom to be who you want to be, not who circumstances force you to be. The project was completed 2 weeks ahead of schedule. The results exceeded expectations. Headquarters in Wolfsburg was so impressed that they requested my transfer to the main development team. It was a promotion of my dreams, a significantly higher salary, recognition, everything I had hoped for 3 years ago when I joined Fisher Industries full of ambition. But then something strange happened. I no longer needed this external validation, not because I had become arrogant, but because I had discovered something more valuable, self-respect. On the day of the official announcement, Mr. Weber organized a small event in the department. This was unusual for him, a naturally rigorous and professional man. "Colleagues," he began, his voice softer than usual. "Today we're not just celebrating the success of the project. We're honoring something rarer and more valuable, a true transformation of character." He looked straight at me. 6 months ago, in this very room, I spoke harsh words to Engineer Hoffman, words that in retrospect were unfair, not because they were wrong at the time, but because they failed to recognize the potential he possessed. There was absolute silence in the room. Hoffman didn't react with words. He didn't apologize. He didn't make promises. He simply changed. Quietly, consistently, without fanfare or drama. And in doing so, he not only proved me wrong about him, he taught me something I had forgotten in 30 years of his career. Weber paused, and for the first time since I had known him, I saw something like emotion in his eyes. He reminded me that it's never too late, that a single moment of decision can change an entire trajectory. That quiet discipline is more powerful than any motivational speech, and that the best answered doubt is living proof. Applause filled the room, but it wasn't the applause that touched me. It was the sight of some of my colleagues, especially the younger ones, looking at me not with envy, but with a different perspective, inspiration. After the event, a young engineer named Lucas approached me. He was 24, newly hired, and I saw a lot of my old self in him. "Mr. Hoffman," he said shyly, "may I ask a question?" "Okay, Lucas, how did you do that? How did you just change?" "Because I see myself where you were. I'm late. I'm only doing the bare minimum, and I know I need to change, but I don't know how to start." I sat down with him, and for the first time, I told him my whole story. The principles, the stoic determination, the 5:30 in the morning, the quiet constancy. "But the most important thing, Lucas," I said, "isn't the time you wake up, it's the decision you make. The decision that your word to yourself is more important than your feelings, that you will do what you promised, even if every part of you wants to give up. Discipline isn't about getting up early or working hard. It's about the alignment between who you want to be and how you actually live. It's about closing the gap between intention and action." Luke wrote everything down, but then he asked the question everyone asks. What if I fail? What if I start and give up? I smiled as I remembered asking myself the same question. So you start over and over again until starting over becomes impossible because you're already the person you wanted to be. The mistake isn't falling, Lucas. The mistake is making falling your identity. You aren't your past mistakes. You are your next decisions. 6 months later, I was in Wolfsburg at the headquarters of Fisher Industries. I led a team of 12 engineers, an office overlooking the automotive complex, everything that symbolized success. But real change never came. The real change happened in the morning. There was no longer an alarm clock at 4:30. My body simply woke up, ready, not out of a sense of duty, but because that hour had been assigned to me, my moment of stillness, of planning, of connecting with myself. I was on my morning run through the empty streets of Wolfsburg, processing complex problems while my body moved. It was the way I treated my team. I never humiliated them, but always challenged them, because I knew the destructive power of humiliation and the transformative power of a respectful challenge. I was in my apartment, simple but immaculate. Every object had a purpose. Nothing was superfluous, for I had learned that external discipline reflects internal order. And surprisingly, that was the case in my relationship. 3 months after beginning my transformation, I received a message from Anna. She had heard about my changes through mutual friends. She wanted to know how I was doing. We talked. She immediately noticed the difference, not only in my words, but also in the way I spoke. clearly and distinctly, purposefully, without the fog of self-pity that used to overshadow everything. "You look different, Klaus," she said over our first coffee together in months. "Not just better. Different. Like you found something you've been looking for." "I found it," I replied. "I found discipline. And through that, I found myself." We didn't get back together right away. It wasn't about rekindling an old romance. It was about two people who had grown apart and were now realizing their shared journey. But over time, we carefully and respectfully built something new, not based on who we were, but on who we became. And when we finally got engaged a year later, it happened without much fanfare. It was a Saturday morning after our 5:30 a.m. run together, when we were sitting in an empty cafe in Wolfsburg, watching the city wake up. "Do you know what I love most about you right now?" asked Anna. "Was that you keep promises, not just to me, but to yourself as well. And a man who keeps promises to himself will never break the ones he makes to others." 2 years after this public humiliation, I returned to Stuttgart for a company conference. It was strange to be back in the building where everything had changed. The conference was about leadership and development in engineering. And to my surprise, Mr. Weber was there. After his retirement, he had become a consultant and specialized in talent development. We meet without a break. "Hoffman," he said, shaking my hand warmly, "I hear you're doing great things in Wolfsburg." "I'll try, Mr. Weber. I'll try." "Still waking up before sunrise?" I smiled. "Every day. It's become a part of me." Weber nodded contentedly. "You know, Hoffman, I've been thinking a lot about that day, about that meeting, about the words I said." He paused and looked out the window at the company yard. "For years, I thought my role as a leader was to identify and expose weaknesses. I thought pressure and humiliation were motivational tools. If I was tough enough, people would either get stronger or leave." He looked straight at me. "But you showed me I was only half right. Yes, some people need a shock to wake them up. But what really makes the difference isn't the humiliation. It's what the person does with it. And that decision is never in the hands of the leader. It's in the hands of the individual." "Mr. Weber," I said, "those were the harshest words I've ever heard. But they were also the most necessary. Not because they were cruel, but because they were true. And sometimes the truth has to hurt to penetrate our defenses. Don't you hate me for that?" "Hate? No. Actually, I'm grateful. Because you gave me something no one else had the courage to give: brutal honesty. Everyone else just tolerated me and watched my decline in pitying silence. You were the only one who cared enough to confront me." Weber was silent for a moment and processed the events. "Do you know how I use your story now? When I'm working as a consultant, of course, I won't name names, but I'll tell the story of a young engineer who turned humiliation into fuel, who preferred quiet action to verbal defense, who proved his worth not with promises, but with consistency. And you know what's most interesting?" he continued. "Half the people who hear the story focus on the wrong part. They want to know the trick, the shortcut, the magic 4:30 a.m. system. But those who truly understand it know that it's not about the time. It's about the choice. The choice to no longer be a victim of circumstance and to become the architect of your own destiny." He was right, because over the next 2 years, I received dozens of messages. Young engineers, professionals in crisis situations, even students. All of them wanted to know the secret. And I've always given the same answer: there's no secret. It's just a matter of making a decision, followed by consistent action. It's just about understanding that you don't have to shout about your transformation. You just have to live it. 3 years after that fateful meeting, something unexpected happened. Fisher Industries launched a program called the Dawn Program, a development initiative for young engineers who were struggling with motivation and performance issues. And they asked me to take over the leadership. It was ironic. The man who had been called lazy was now supposed to teach discipline. But it was also poetic. The circle was complete. The show wasn't about motivational speeches. It wasn't about yelling at people or publicly humiliating them. It was something else. It was about individualized care. It was about helping each individual recognize their own humiliation, their own breaking point, and then given him the philosophical and practical tools to turn it into a turning point. We worked with Stoic principles, with habit systems, with quiet responsibility, with the deep understanding that motivation is temporary, but discipline is permanent. One of the first participants was Lucas, the young engineer who had approached me years ago. He was having problems, was late, and only did the bare minimum. Just like me, I sat down with him one Monday morning. Lucas, I'm going to ask you a question, and you have to be honest with me and with yourself. Who do you want to be in 5 years? He thought, I want to be respected. I want to lead important projects. I want people to recognize my value. Good. Now another question. Will the person you are today, your habits, your choices, your discipline get you there? Be silent. No, he finally admitted. This person is falling behind. So you have two options, Lucas. Continue to be that person and accept that your dreams remain dreams. Or decide now, today, that you will close the gap between who you are and who you want to be. Not tomorrow. Not next Monday. Now. But how? How can I just change? You don't change everything at once. You decide on one thing, and you do it consistently until it's no longer something you do, but something you are. What is that thing? For me, it was getting up at 4:30. But for you, it might be different. It might be arriving at 7:15. It might be not checking your phone for the first 2 hours of work. It might be taking 30 minutes a day to learn something new. It's not the specific action that matters. It's a commitment to consistency. Luke decided to come every day at 7:30 without exception for 30 days. What if I fail, he asked. If you fail one day, you don't give up. You analyze why you failed, adapt, and start over. But Lucas, here's the secret no one tells you. You probably won't fail. Do you know why? Because it's not hard to get to 7:30. The difficult part is the decision. Once you've actually decided, the action becomes mechanical. But how do I actually decide? How do I know it's different this time? I looked at him and saw myself 3 years ago, asking myself the same question. You decide when you're more tired of standing still than afraid of moving. You decide when the pain of staying the same outweighs the pain of change. You decide when you look in the mirror and no longer recognize the person you're reflecting, and that lack of recognition scares you more than any effort. 6 months later, the Dawn program had 17 participants. Some were immediately successful. Others struggled. 2 dropped out. But Lucas has changed, not just in terms of punctuality or productivity. He changed fundamentally. I saw in his eyes the same transformation I had experienced. That clarity, that quiet purpose. One day, he came to me with news. Hoffman, I've received an offer. A competitor is offering a 20% salary increase. My heart sank. I didn't want to lose him, but I knew what my role was. And you want to leave? I don't know. I like what we're building here. I like who I'm becoming. But the money, Lucas, I'll tell you something I've learned. Money is important, but never let money be the only reason you stay or leave. Ask yourself, where will you grow the most? Where will you be challenged? Where can you build something meaningful? He thought for a long moment. Here, he finally said, this is where I grow. This is where I earn even more. Then you already have your answer. But then I did something unexpected. I went to HR and advocated for a raise for Lucas. Not as much as a competitor's offer, but enough to show that we recognize his value. When I told him, Lucas remained silent. Why did you do that? Because you didn't ask for it. Because you were willing to stay without it. And those are the people who deserve a reward. The ones who do the right thing regardless of the reward. In that moment, something became clear to me. I had come full circle. I had experienced humiliation and transformed it into discipline. Discipline became excellence. Excellence gave me opportunities. And now this opportunity enabled me to support others. This was a true legacy of this discipline. Not just one's own transformation, but the development of a person who can catalyze transformation in others. But life always tests our discipline, just when we think we have mastered it. In the 4th year after my transformation, something happened that shook everything I had built. My father suffered a stroke, a severe one, He was in Munich, more than 500 kilometers away. My mother, already frail from old age, couldn't cope on her own. At 6 in the morning, I got the call, already at the office. My mother was crying, barely able to speak. "Klaus, it's your father. You have to come." I left immediately. I was in shock for 5 hours. When I arrived at the hospital, my father was in an artificial coma. The doctors didn't know if he would survive. Over the next few weeks, my life became chaotic. I commuted back and forth between Wolfsburg and Munich. I slept in hospital chairs. My routine, the discipline that had become my identity, collapsed. There was no 4:30 in the morning. There were no races. There was no morning silence to center me. And for the first time in years, I felt the old Klaus resurface, the temptation to give up, to drink to numb the pain, to just let it all go, because after all, it was a crisis. I had an excuse. One night at 2 a.m., I couldn't sleep in a hotel near the hospital, so I grabbed my old notebook, the one in which I had written down my 5 principles. I read the first one. I can't control what happens, but I can control my actions. Tears came to my eyes, because I realized this was a true test. Anyone can be disciplined when life is simple, when routines are predictable, when there are no crises. But what happens when the rug is pulled out from under you? When everything you plan becomes irrelevant? That's when you realize how much discipline you really need. It's not about following a rigid routine. It's about sticking to your principles, even when routine is impossible. So I made a decision. I couldn't get up at 4:30. I couldn't run. I couldn't maintain my normal work routine. But I could do something. Every day, no matter how difficult. I could do something that connected me to the person I had become. Some days it was just 15 minutes of stoic reading in the hospital. Other days it was a 10-minute walk around the building. Some days I simply wrote 3 sentences in my journal about what I was grateful for. It wasn't my old routine, but it was my basic discipline, adapted to crisis. And that saved me. My father awoke from a coma after 12 days. It was a medical miracle, the doctor said, but the recovery would take a long time. Months of physical therapy. He had to learn to speak and walk again. I stayed in Munich for 6 weeks. Fisher Industries was incredibly understanding and allowed me to work from home and take as much vacation time as I needed. During those weeks in the hospital, something unexpected happened. My father, who was slowly regaining his ability to speak, asked me about my life, how I was doing. It was strange. We'd never been close. He was an old-school German, emotionally distant, focused on providing, not on bonding. But impending death changes people. "Klaus," he said one afternoon, his voice still weak, "your mother told me about your change, about how you changed your life." I held her hand, which was now surprisingly fragile. "It was necessary, Father. I was like that too," he confessed. "When I was your age, lost, without direction. Your grandfather," he said harsh words to me, very harsh words. He called me a failure. I didn't know that. I'd never heard that story before. "What did you do?" "Just like you. I decided to prove him wrong." "But Klaus, it took me 30 years to figure this out, and you figured it out in 3. It wasn't about proving anything to him. It was about finding out who I really am when I stopped making excuses." Tears streamed down his face. "I'm proud of you, my son, not for your success, but for having the courage to change when it was easier to give up." In that moment, something inside me healed that I didn't even know was broken. I finally received the recognition I had subconsciously sought my entire life. But most importantly, I realized I no longer needed it, because the man in the mirror liked me. And that was enough. When I finally returned to Wolfsburg 8 weeks later, I expected chaos. Projects were behind schedule, the team was unmotivated, and problems were piling up. Instead, I found something surprising. Lucas had temporarily taken over management, and he had done an extraordinary job. He not only kept everything running smoothly, but also implemented improvements, motivated the team, and exceeded expectations. "How did you do that?" I asked, genuinely impressed. "I did what you would do," he said. "Simply, I asked myself, What would Hoffman do? And then I did it. I came early. I led by example. I kept my word. That's how I learned from you. At that moment, I understood something profound about heritage. Legacy isn't about being irreplaceable. It's about creating a system of values so strong that it will continue without you. It's about conveying principles, not just processes. I had become replaceable, and that wasn't a failure. It was the greatest possible success, because it meant that the transformation wasn't just happening within me. It was spreading. It was becoming a culture. It was becoming something bigger than a man waking up before sunrise. 5 years after that humiliating meeting, I received an unexpected invitation. The Technical University of Munich, my alma mater, was organizing a symposium on leadership in engineering, and they wanted me to be a speaker. I, who was a burden. I, who was called lazy in front of my entire team. I, who is now invited to inspire the next generation. Life has a strange sense of humor. I accepted, and the evening before the lecture in my hotel in Munich, I prepared my notes. But then I stopped, because I realized I didn't need notes. I just had to tell my story. Raw, honest, without embellishment. The next day, I walked onto the stage. 200 engineering students, bright-eyed, full of ambition and dreams, just like I once was. I began without any detailed introductions. My boss told me I was lazy, and he was absolutely right. There was absolute silence in the auditorium. This isn't a story about a hero who always knew his way. It's about a man who completely lost his way and had to rediscover himself in the most painful way imaginable. For 40 minutes, I recounted everything. The humiliation, the decision, for 30 in the morning, the silent perseverance, the struggles, the victories, the crisis with my father, the realization that discipline is a rigidity, but fundamental adaptation. The most important lesson I've learned, I concluded, has nothing to do with getting up early. It's not about working hard. It's this: you don't have to flaunt your results loudly when you live by evidence. You don't have to defend who you are when your actions speak for you. And you don't have to prove anything to anyone except the person in the mirror. Because in the end, only your own recognition counts. And you don't earn this recognition through grand promises or one-off heroic deeds, but through small, consistent decisions day after day, even when no one's watching, especially when no one's watching. Your boss may call you lazy. Life may humiliate you. Circumstances may disrupt your routine. But nothing, absolutely nothing, can take away your ability to decide who you will be in the next moment, and the next, and the next. This is true Stoic discipline. It's not about controlling the world. It's about governing yourself. When I finished, there was a moment of silence, then applause. But it wasn't the applause that counted. It was a young student who later came to me with tears in his eyes and said, "I was you for 5 years, and you just gave me hope that I can change." It was a teacher who thanked me for being honest about failure. Because everyone teaches success, but no one teaches resurrection. It was an email I received weeks later from a student. "I woke up at 5 a.m. today for the first time. I don't know if I'll stick with it, but I made the decision. Thank you for showing me that the decision is the first step." Today, 7 years after that meeting, I wake up at 5 a.m., not 4:30 a.m. anymore, because I've learned that discipline isn't about magic numbers. It's about determination. I'm a technical director at Fisher Industries. My team consists of 62 employees. I've been married to Anna for 3 years, and our first child was born 6 months ago. My father recovered, though never fully, but we spent more time together in recent years than in my entire life before, and he still occasionally tells me how proud he is. Mr. Weber has become a good friend. We meet monthly for dinner and discuss philosophy, leadership, and life. He jokes that I'm his greatest success, but I always add, "You were just a catalyst." The transformation was my decision. The Amman Hesser program has evolved. It is now implemented in all departments of Fisher Industries. 43 people have already completed it. Not all of them were successful, but for those who were, it changed not only their careers, but also their lives. And I still keep that notebook. These 5 principles: written down on a night of despair that became the most important night of my life. Whenever a young engineer comes to me and asks for advice because he wants to know the secret, the system, the trick, I show him this notebook. That's the secret. I say, 5 simple principles. None of them magical, none of them easy, but all of them have an absolutely transformative effect if you live them consistently. The first step isn't great. It's not heroic. It's simply about making a decision. The decision that you're worth the effort, that your life is worth living intentionally, that you deserve to become who you can be. And then, after the decision, comes the hard part. Waking up the next day and doing it again, and the next day, and the next. Not because it's exciting, not because anyone applauds, but because you made a decision, and decisions only mean something when they're followed by action. My boss said I was lazy, and that was the nicest thing anyone could say to me, because it forced me to face a truth I had been avoiding. I had given up on myself long before anyone else had given up on me. The transformation didn't begin when I woke up at 4:30. It began when I decided to no longer allow myself to be defined by my circumstances, but by my choices. And the best part of this journey, not that I disproved Weber, but that I proved to myself that I was right all along. I had potential. I just needed the courage to recognize it. You, who are listening to this story, could be in the same situation as me. Maybe your boss doesn't respect you. Maybe you're not where you want to be. Maybe you look in the mirror and don't like the person you see. Let me tell you something. You're not at the end. You're not irretrievably lost. You're exactly where you need to be to make the most important decision of your life. The decision that from this moment on, your actions speak louder than any words. That your consistency is your best answer. That you don't have to proclaim your transformation, but simply live it. The sun will rise tomorrow anyway. The question is, will you be awake to see it? Not physically awake, but truly awake to the potential within you? Because ultimately, the only person you have to impress is the one who looks back at you in the mirror every morning. And that person deserves to see a warrior staring back at them. If this story touched you, if it awakened something dormant within you, don't just like it. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Tag someone struggling. Be the catalyst in someone else's life, just as Weber was in mine. And most importantly, make the decision. Today, now, not tomorrow. Because tomorrow dreams die. Today transformations are born. Write in the comments. I decide. Just these 2 words. Because when you declare it publicly, when you put your intention out into the world, something magical happens. The decision becomes reality. And if you'd like to read more stories like this, stories of true transformation, of real-life stoic discipline, subscribe to the channel and click the bell. Every week, I'll share a story about the experiences of ordinary people who made extraordinary decisions. Remember, you don't have to loudly present your results when you live like proof. Your actions are your best presentation. Your consistency is your greatest revenge. And your quiet transformation is more powerful than 1,000 empty promises. Dawn awaits you. The only question is, will you have the courage to face it? I'm Klaus Hoffman, and that was my story. Now, write yours. Until the next transformation,